December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. As the morning sun cast long shadows across the calm Pacific waters, 9 elite pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy's 1st Air Fleet prepared their aircraft for a mission that would forever alter the course of history. Lieutenant Commander Mitsuo Fukuda gazed confidently at his squadron, certain they would return as heroes to their carrier, the Akagi. None of them could have imagined that within hours, their entire understanding of warfare, honor, and survival would be irrevocably shattered. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the untold story of 9 Japanese pilots whose disappearance during the opening salvo of the Pacific War would remain shrouded in mystery for nearly 8 decades, until a discovery in 2019 would reveal a truth far more complex than the simple narrative of wartime heroism or tragedy that both sides had accepted. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the North Pacific on December 6, 1941. Aboard the aircraft carrier Akagi, flagship of Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo's 1st Air Fleet, Commander Minoru Jinda reviewed the final attack plans with calculating precision. The 6-carrier task force had maintained radio silence for weeks, traveling over 4,000 miles across the Pacific to position itself 230 miles north of Oahu. With 414 aircraft at their disposal, including 140 Mitsubishi A6M-0 fighters, 103 Aichi D-3 Aval dive bombers, and 171 Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers, the Japanese force represented the most powerful carrier strike group ever assembled. Our pilots have trained for this moment for months, Jinda remarked to Admiral Nagumo. The Americans remain entirely unaware of our approach. Victory is assured. Lieutenant Akira Yamamoto checked his personal items one last time before reporting to the flight deck. At 26, he was among the most experienced Zero pilots in the fleet, with over 1,200 flight hours. His leather-bound journal, tucked securely in his flight jacket, contained a letter to his wife Sachiko and their infant son whom he had never seen. When I return, he had written, I will bring honor to our family and the Emperor. The Americans will learn the power of Japanese spirit today. Beside him stood his wingmen, Lieutenants Hideki Kato and Toshio Nakamura, both graduates of the prestigious Ada Jima Naval Academy. Further down the narrow passageway, the other 6 pilots prepared themselves. Lieutenant Shigeru Morita, at 32 the oldest of the group, had already achieved 17 confirmed kills in the skies over China. The others, Lieutenants Hideo Tanaka, Kenji Okada, Ichiro Watanabe, Takashi Kimura, and Ensign Hiroshi Matsuda, the youngest at 21, represented the cream of Japanese naval aviation. At 0550 hours, the flight deck of the Akagi hummed with activity as deck crews positioned the first wave of aircraft. The temperature was 40 degrees Fahrenheit with winds at 8 knots from the northeast, perfect flying conditions. Lieutenant Commander Fukuda, who would lead the entire attack force, addressed the pilots with stirring words about their historic mission. The Japanese naval doctrine had prepared for this decisive battle for decades, investing heavily in carrier aviation while the Americans remained fixated on battleship supremacy. Today, we strike the first blow that will lead to certain victory, Fukuda declared. When we return, Japan will be on the path to controlling the entire Pacific. What Fukuda couldn't know was that his 9 elite pilots would be assigned a special mission, one that would separate them from the main attack force. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, had insisted on a contingency plan. We must have eyes that can report the true damage, he had written in a classified order to Nagumo. History will judge our actions today, and we must know with certainty what we have accomplished. Captain Takeo Sato, the Akagi's air group commander, pulled the 9 pilots aside as the first aircraft began roaring down the flight deck. Your mission is different, he informed them. After the initial attack waves, you will conduct low-altitude reconnaissance over the harbor. Document everything you see. This intelligence will be critical for the follow-up attacks. What seemed like a straightforward mission would soon become anything but. At 0615 hours, the first wave launched from the carriers, 183 aircraft in total. Lieutenant Yamamoto and his 8 fellow reconnaissance pilots would follow in the second wave, launching at 0745 hours. Their specially modified Zeros carried extra fuel tanks and compact Mamiya 6 cameras rather than the standard complement of ammunition. 5,000 miles east, at Pearl Harbor, the morning unfolded with typical Sunday tranquility. Lieutenant James Patterson of the USS Ward patrolled the harbor entrance, fighting to stay alert after a long night watch. "Just another quiet morning in paradise," he remarked to Ensign William Outerbridge. Neither man could imagine that within hours, 2,403 American servicemen would lie dead, 18 ships would be sunk or damaged, and 188 aircraft would be destroyed. The massive American Pacific Fleet represented enormous power: 8 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, 6 light cruisers, 29 destroyers, and 5 submarines. Yet this fleet lacked a crucial element that the Japanese possessed: a combat-ready carrier force. The USS Enterprise and USS Lexington were both at sea on December 7th, a stroke of luck that would prove decisive for America's future in the Pacific War. At 0749 hours, radar operators Joseph Lockard and George Elliott at the Opana radar station detected the first wave of Japanese aircraft approaching from the north. When they reported the sighting, their lieutenant dismissed it as an expected flight of B-17 bombers from California. This catastrophic intelligence failure would set the stage for the chaos to come. By 0755 hours, as Commander Fukuda's aircraft approached Pearl Harbor, he transmitted the famous code phrase, "Tora, Tora, Tora," indicating complete surprise had been achieved. The first bombs fell moments later, beginning 90 minutes of devastating attacks that would sink or severely damage 21 ships of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Lieutenant Yamamoto and his 8 reconnaissance pilots listened to the radio chatter from the main attack force with growing excitement. "The Americans are completely unprepared," Lieutenant Kato remarked. "This will be even easier than we thought." As the second wave launched, the 9 reconnaissance pilots took off in perfect formation from the Akagi. Their mission was to arrive after the second wave completed its attack, photographing the damage and identifying targets for a possible third wave that Nagumo was considering. What they didn't know was that the American response, though delayed and disorganized, was rapidly gaining momentum. By 0840 hours, despite the destruction of 188 U.S. aircraft on the ground, nearly 50 American fighters had managed to get airborne, including P-36 Hawks and P-40 Warhawks from Hala Auxiliary Airfield and Wheeler Field. U.S. Army Air Force's Lieutenant Kenneth Taylor had rushed from a formal dance the night before, still wearing his tuxedo pants when he climbed into his P-40B Warhawk. Together with his roommate, Lieutenant George Welch, they would claim multiple Japanese aircraft that morning. "They came at us in perfect formations," Taylor would later recall, "almost like they were on parade. It was like shooting fish in a barrel until they realized we were there." What Taylor couldn't know was that his path would soon cross with that of the 9 Japanese reconnaissance pilots. As Yamamoto's reconnaissance squadron approached Oahu at 0930 hours, they were stunned by what they saw. Black smoke billowed thousands of feet into the air above Pearl Harbor. The battleship Arizona had completely exploded after a bomb penetrated her forward magazine. The Oklahoma had capsized. The West Virginia, California, and Nevada were sinking at their moorings. It was a scene of utter devastation that confirmed the attack's success. "Begin photo reconnaissance," ordered Lieutenant Yamamoto. "Maintain tight formation and altitude of 3,500 feet." The 9 Zeros began their careful photographic runs, documenting the burning ships and damaged airfields. What they failed to notice was Lieutenant Taylor and 3 other P-40s climbing toward them from the direction of the sun. "Japanese aircraft, 10 o'clock high," radioed Lieutenant Welch. "Let's get him." The American fighters dove on the Japanese reconnaissance formation with devastating effect. Having modified their aircraft for reconnaissance rather than combat, the 9 Japanese pilots found themselves suddenly outgunned and vulnerable. "Evasive action," shouted Lieutenant Yamamoto as tracer rounds streaked past his cockpit. "Split up and rendezvous at Point Baker." The formation dissolved as the Japanese pilots scattered, diving toward the waves in an attempt to escape. Lieutenant Kato's Zero erupted in flames after taking multiple hits from Taylor's P-40. Lieutenant Nakamura managed to down one American fighter before his own aircraft was critically damaged. One by one, the Japanese pilots found themselves in desperate battles for survival. What happened next would remain unknown for decades. Meanwhile, aboard the Akagi, Admiral Nagumo faced a momentous decision. His staff urged him to launch the planned third wave to destroy the vital fuel storage tanks, submarine base, and repair facilities at Pearl Harbor. These targets, if destroyed, would have forced the U.S. Pacific Fleet to withdraw to the West Coast, potentially delaying America's counteroffensive by years. "We have achieved complete surprise and inflicted severe damage," argued Commander Genda. A third wave could cripple their Pacific operations entirely. But Nagumo was concerned about the unknown whereabouts of the American carriers and the increasing American aerial resistance. The element of surprise was gone. His force had already achieved its primary objective of neutralizing the battleship threat. "The first and second waves have accomplished their mission," Nagumo declared. "We shall withdraw while our victory is certain." This fateful decision, one that military historians would debate for decades, was made without the crucial reconnaissance information that Yamamoto's 9 pilots had been sent to gather. As Nagumo gave the order to recover aircraft and set course back to Japan, the absence of the reconnaissance squadron was noted but attributed to combat losses. "They have given their lives for the Emperor," Nagumo remarked. "Their sacrifice will not be forgotten." In the American Naval Intelligence Center at Pearl Harbor, confusion reigned as damage reports flooded in. Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, the Pacific Fleet intelligence officer, worked frantically to assess the situation. "We need to account for every Japanese aircraft," he ordered. "I want to know their capabilities, their tactics, everything." Amid the chaos, reports came in of Japanese aircraft downed in unusual locations, not near the harbor or airfields, but along the northern coast of Oahu and even further out to sea. These reports were filed away as the more pressing concerns of rescue operations and damage control took priority. 3 days after the attack, a small fishing boat captained by Thomas Mayhew made a strange discovery off the north shore of Molokai. The wreckage of an aircraft, clearly Japanese by its markings, had washed ashore on a remote beach. Inside was the body of a pilot, still strapped in his seat. "Never seen anything like it," Mayhew reported to naval authorities at Kaunakake Harbor. Plane was mostly intact, like it landed on the water. Pilot had a camera, lots of film. Lieutenant James Richardson of Naval Intelligence immediately secured the site and confiscated all materials. "This is now classified," he informed Mayhew. "Do not discuss what you found with anyone." The camera and film were sent to Pearl Harbor for analysis, but in the fog of war, they became just another piece of intelligence in an overwhelming flow of information. The pilot's body was quietly buried in an unmarked grave, his identity and mission unknown to the Americans who laid him to rest. Aboard the returning Japanese carrier fleet, the loss of the reconnaissance squadron was officially recorded. Captain Sato personally wrote condolence letters to each family, praising their sons' and husbands' courage and sacrifice. The 9 pilots were posthumously promoted and awarded the Order of the Golden Kite, 4th class, one of Japan's highest military decorations. In Tokyo, the news of the Pearl Harbor attack was met with jubilation. The government-controlled newspapers trumpeted the great victory. Hawaii Operation Success. 300 enemy planes destroyed. American fleet crippled. The names of the 9 missing reconnaissance pilots were listed among the 29 Japanese airmen lost during the operation. Their families received the news with the stoic pride expected in Japanese society, where dying for the emperor was considered the highest honor. But the full truth of what happened to those 9 pilots would remain hidden for decades, buried in classified files, unexamined photographs, and the memories of those who encountered them in their final hours. Lieutenant Yamamoto had managed to evade the American fighters by flying low over the waves, but his Zero had sustained damage. Low on fuel and separated from his squadron, he made a critical decision to head for the small island of Niihau, the westernmost inhabited Hawaiian island. Japanese naval intelligence had identified it as sparsely populated, primarily by native Hawaiians who they believed would be neutral or possibly sympathetic to Japanese forces. What Lieutenant Yamamoto couldn't know was that his decision would set in motion one of the strangest and least known episodes of World War II. At 1,145 hours on December 7th, Yamamoto's damaged Zero crash-landed on a field near the main settlement on Niihau. The island had no electricity or telephone connections to the other islands, and news of the Pearl Harbor attack had not yet reached its approximately 130 inhabitants. Howard Kiliohano, a native Hawaiian resident, was the first to encounter Yamamoto. Despite the pilot's attempt to win the islanders' trust by offering him his pistol and papers, Kiliohano confiscated these items and, suspicious of the armed foreigner, summoned the island's residents. Unable to communicate effectively, the islanders took Yamamoto to the home of the only Japanese-American couple on the island, Yoshio and Irene Harada, hoping they could translate. This fateful decision would have dramatic consequences. When Yoshio Harada learned of the Pearl Harbor attack from Yamamoto, his loyalties became divided. Over the following days, as the islanders waited for the owner of the island, Aylmer Robinson, to make his weekly visit from Kauai, which was delayed due to a military quarantine, Yamamoto convinced Harada to assist him. Meanwhile, the other 8 reconnaissance pilots had met various fates. Lieutenant Nakamura's damaged Zero crashed at sea, and he perished on impact. Lieutenant Kato managed to ditch his burning aircraft, but drowned while attempting to swim to shore. Lieutenants Morita, Tanaka, and Okada were shot down by American fighters and killed instantly. Lieutenant Watanabe crashed on the northern shore of Oahu but survived, only to be captured by a U.S. Army patrol. Ensign Matsuda disappeared entirely, his aircraft presumably lost at sea. The most intriguing fate belonged to Lieutenant Kimura. His Zero, though damaged, remained flyable. Low on fuel and disoriented, he made the decision to fly northwest, hoping to reach the Japanese Naval Task Force. After flying for nearly 3 hours, his fuel nearly exhausted, Kimura spotted a small atoll, one of the uninhabited northwestern Hawaiian islands. Kimura managed a rough landing on a sandy beach of what he would later learn was Kure Atoll, nearly 1,400 miles northwest of Pearl Harbor. There, with his emergency rations, a survival kit, and the wreckage of his Zero, he would begin an ordeal that would test the limits of human endurance. Back on Niihau, Lieutenant Yamamoto's situation deteriorated rapidly. On December 12th, with the help of Yoshio Harada, who had stolen Kiliohano's papers and acquired a shotgun, Yamamoto took Harada's wife and several islanders hostage. Their plan was to signal a Japanese submarine or aircraft, destroy Yamamoto's Crash Zero, and escape the island. What they hadn't counted on was the courage of Benihakaka Ben Kanahele and his wife Kealoha. When Yamamoto threatened Kealoha with a pistol, Ben Kanahele, a 49-year-old native Hawaiian standing 6 feet tall, charged the Japanese pilot despite being shot 3 times. Kanahele lifted Yamamoto and smashed him against a stone wall. Kealoha then delivered the final blow with a rock to Yamamoto's head. Yoshio Harada, witnessing this turn of events and realizing the consequences of his actions, committed suicide. The Niihau incident, as it became known in classified reports, was quickly suppressed by U.S. military authorities who feared its potential to inflame anti-Japanese sentiment and lead to further mistreatment of Japanese Americans. Ben Kanahele survived his wounds and was awarded the Purple Heart and the Medal for Merit, becoming one of the few civilians to receive such high honors. The story, however, remained largely unknown to the public for decades. Lieutenant Kimura's story took an even more remarkable turn. For 94 days, he survived on Kure Atoll, subsisting on fish, seabirds, and rainwater. He maintained a meticulous diary, recording his thoughts and observations. "I remain loyal to the Emperor," he wrote on his 50th day of isolation, "but I begin to question the wisdom of this war. In the face of nature's indifference, national boundaries seem meaningless." On March 11, 1942, a U.S. Navy PBY Catalina flying boat spotted the wreckage of Kimura Zero during a routine patrol. Upon landing, they discovered the emaciated but still living pilot, who surrendered without resistance. Lieutenant Watanabe, captured on Oahu, and Lieutenant Kimura, rescued from Kure Atoll, both became prisoners of war. Initially held at a camp in Hawaii, They were later transferred to Camp McCoy in Wisconsin. There, they experienced treatment that contradicted everything they had been taught about American barbarism. The Americans provide us with adequate food, shelter, and medical care, Watanabe wrote in a censored letter to a fellow officer in 1943. They treat us with an unexpected level of dignity. This contradicts everything we were told before the war. Both men were interviewed extensively by U.S. naval intelligence, providing valuable insights into Japanese naval aviation, training methods, and morale. What surprised their interrogators most was their gradual shift in perspective. Lieutenant Kimura particularly seems to have undergone a profound change in outlook, noted Lieutenant Commander James Clagett in his 1944 assessment. His extended isolation and subsequent humane treatment as a POW have led him to question many aspects of Japanese imperial ideology. After the war ended in 1945, Lieutenants Watanabe and Kimura faced a difficult decision. Japan had been utterly defeated, its cities devastated by bombing, its economy in ruins. Both men knew that as surviving pilots from the Pearl Harbor attack, they would face intense questioning by American occupation authorities if they returned home. Moreover, under the Japanese military code, surrender was considered dishonorable. Their families had been officially notified of their heroic deaths in battle. To return alive after having been prisoners would bring shame not only to themselves, but to their families. In a remarkable choice that reflected their transformed worldview, both men requested permission to remain in the United States. This unusual request reached the desk of Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal, who saw a potential propaganda value in their story. These men represent a unique opportunity, Forrestal wrote to President Truman in October 1945. Their journey from fanatical devotion to the Japanese Empire to an embrace of democratic values demonstrates the potential for ideological reform that our occupation of Japan hopes to achieve. With executive approval, Watanabe and Kimura were granted special immigration status. Their existence remained classified, however, with both men assuming new identities. Watanabe became Thomas Watkins and settled in San Francisco, where he worked as a gardener and later opened a successful landscaping business. Kimura, taking the name Kenneth Kimura, moved to Chicago and found employment as a draftsman for an engineering firm. Both men married American women and raised families who knew little of their true backgrounds. Both struggled with the dual burden of survivor's guilt and cultural dislocation, finding solace in the Buddhist temples that served the Japanese-American communities in their adopted cities. In Japan, the official histories maintained that all 9 reconnaissance pilots had died heroically during the Pearl Harbor operation. Their families honored their memories at annual ceremonies marking the anniversary of the attack. The Japanese government awarded pensions to their parents, widows, and children, who lived with the mixed blessing of being related to war heroes. It was not until 1970 that the first cracks in this narrative appeared. Sachiko Yamamoto, who had never remarried after being notified of her husband Lieutenant Akira Yamamoto's death, received an anonymous letter postmarked from Honolulu. Inside was a faded photograph of a Japanese memorial on Niihau Island and a brief note. "Your husband rests here. He was brave until the end." Confused and disturbed, Sachiko contacted Japanese authorities, who dismissed the letter as a cruel hoax. Unsatisfied, she began her own investigation, writing letters to Hawaiian historical societies and Japanese-American organizations. Most went unanswered, but a few responses provided tantalizing hints about the Niihau incident. By 1975, her persistent inquiries had attracted the attention of Hideki Matsunaga, an investigative journalist for the Asahi Shimbun newspaper. Matsunaga began researching the story, discovering that the official records of the Pearl Harbor attack contained numerous inconsistencies regarding the 9 reconnaissance pilots. "The more I investigate, the more questions emerge," Matsunaga wrote in his notes. Why were these 9 pilots' bodies never recovered? Why are there no detailed mission reports for their specific squadron? Why has no one from their carrier ever spoken about their particular role? Matsunaga's investigation gained momentum when he located Kealoha Kanahele, Ben Kanahele's widow, still living on Niihau. Though elderly, her memory of the events remained sharp. "The pilot was not trying to attack us at first," she told Matsunaga through an interpreter. He seemed lost, confused. He became desperate only after several days on the island. This account contradicted the official narrative that portrayed all Pearl Harbor pilots as fanatical attackers. Matsunaga published a series of articles in 1976 that created a minor sensation in Japan, prompting demands for the government to release more information about the reconnaissance squadron. Meanwhile, in the United States, the classified status of Watanabe and Kimura's true identities was maintained. Both men, now in their 60s, had become fully integrated into American society. Watanabe's landscaping business had designed gardens for several prominent San Francisco properties. Kimura had risen to become a chief draftsman at his firm, with his name appearing on patents for several mechanical components. In 1978, during President Jimmy Carter's push for government transparency following the Watergate scandal, numerous previously classified World War II documents were declassified. Among them were the interrogation records of Lieutenants Watanabe and Kimura, though their post-war identities and locations remained protected. These documents reached Matsunaga through a Japanese-American historian who had been researching the treatment of Japanese POWs. Their contents were explosive. Two of the supposedly dead Pearl Harbor pilots had not only survived, but had provided valuable intelligence to the Americans and had apparently chosen to remain in the United States after the war. Matsunaga's follow-up articles created an uproar in Japan. The Ministry of Defense was forced to acknowledge that the official history of the Pearl Harbor attack contained certain inaccuracies regarding the fate of some airmen. Families of the reconnaissance pilots demanded to know the full truth. The American government, now led by the Reagan administration, faced a dilemma. Revealing the full story would mean exposing the new identities of Watanabe and Kimura, potentially disrupting their lives and those of their American families. Yet maintaining the secrecy seemed increasingly untenable in the face of Japanese media interest. A compromise was reached. In 1982, the U.S. State Department officially confirmed that Lieutenant Ichiro Watanabe had been captured on Oahu, and Lieutenant Takashi Kimura had been rescued from Kure Atoll. Both had been POWs and had remained in the United States following the war under protected identities. No further details were provided about their current status or locations. For Sachiko Yamamoto and the other families, this partial revelation brought mixed emotions. Their loved ones remained dead, but the knowledge that two of the squadron had survived raised painful questions about how the others had died and whether the Japanese government had been forthright with them. The most complete account emerged in 2019, when a marine archaeological expedition examining wrecks around the Hawaiian Islands discovered the remains of a Zero aircraft in remarkably good condition off the northern coast of Molokai. Serial numbers identified it as Lieutenant Morita's aircraft. Underwater photographs revealed that the pilot had attempted a controlled water landing. The aircraft was largely intact, not showing damage consistent with being shot down. Inside the cockpit, preserved by the unique conditions of the deep ocean environment, researchers found a waterproof case containing undeveloped film and a logbook. When processed using modern techniques, the film revealed extraordinary images, photographs of Pearl Harbor taken after the main attack waves, showing the extent of the damage with remarkable clarity. The logbook, though partially degraded, contained Lieutenant Morita's final entries. His last writing, dated December 7, 1941, at approximately 1,030 hours, revealed a startling truth. Reconnaissance complete. No sign of American carriers. Cannot contact the fleet. Radio damaged. Fuel critically low. Other squadron members scattered. Will attempt water landing near Molokai and await rescue. I do not expect to be found. Strange to think these may be my final words. I fulfilled my duty to the Emperor, but I wonder now about the wisdom of awakening this sleeping giant. These prophetic words, echoing Admiral Yamamoto's purported warning about awakening a sleeping giant, suggested that even in those first hours, some Japanese pilots recognized the strategic folly of attacking the United States. The discovery made international headlines. Japanese and American historians collaborated on a comprehensive reassessment of the Pearl Harbor attack, focusing particularly on the previously overlooked reconnaissance mission. The 9 pilots, once footnotes in history, became the subject of books, documentaries, and academic studies. In 2022, a joint Japanese-American memorial was established on a small overlook on Molokai, bearing the names of all 9 reconnaissance pilots and the words "in memory of those who fulfilled their duty as they understood it," and in honor of the truth that transcends national boundaries. For the families of the pilots, the full revelation brought a measure of closure. Sachiko Yamamoto, now in her late 90s, was finally able to visit the place where her husband had likely perished. He was doing what he believed was right, she told journalists. As was I, waiting all these years. We were both prisoners of our time and place in history. The story of the 9 reconnaissance pilots reveals the complex human reality behind the grand narratives of war. These men, trained to fight for their emperor, found themselves scattered by fate across the Hawaiian Islands and beyond. Some died quickly in battle. Others, like Yamamoto on Niihau and Morita off Molokai, perished alone, far from home. And 2, Watanabe and Kimura, experienced perhaps the strangest fate of all, becoming Americans, living among the very people they had once been sent to attack. Their story reminds us that beneath the strategic decisions, imperial ambitions, and geopolitical consequences of Pearl Harbor were individual human beings caught in currents of history they could influence, but not control. 9 pilots took off from the Akagi on December 7, 1941, not knowing that their mission would fade into obscurity, only to re-emerge decades later as a testament to the unpredictable paths that war creates through human lives. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.